The moon hung low over Nyandoro, swollen and dull like an old eye watching the village breathe in its sleep. The wind slid through the tall raffia trees, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and river moss. In the center of the village, where the clay huts formed a crooked circle, a young man named Jabari sat outside his doorway, listening to the distant murmur of water. It was not the sound of the normal river. He had known that soothing voice since childhood. This sound was different, thick, pulsing, and almost alive. His grandmother used to say, "When the river changes its voice, a spirit has awakened." Tonight Jabari believed her. He lifted his head, trying to catch the direction of the noise, but it echoed like something shifting beneath the ground. The villagers were asleep, unaware, but his body felt tight, coiled, like something wanted to warn him. A faint flute-like hum drifted from the river, so soft he wondered if it was only in his mind. Then he saw it. A shadow, thin and long, moving between the trees near the riverbank. Not walking, sliding. He rose to his feet. "Who is there?" he whispered. The shadow paused, turned, and disappeared into the darkness. Jabari's heart pounded. His father always told him, "Do not follow anything that moves without footsteps." But something inside him, fear mixed with stubborn courage, pulled him toward the river. The grass was cold and wet beneath his feet as he approached the faint glow of moonlight reflected on the water. The river's surface trembled with ripples that weren't caused by wind. When Jabari stepped closer, the water thickened, darkened, almost like oil. And then he saw a shape rise from it. A cloak, dripping. A mask carved from ancient wood hid its face, decorated with river shells and clay symbols. Its fingers were long and winding, like the roots of an old tree. A whisper slithered through the air. "He hungers." Jabari froze. The figure pointed a dripping hand toward him. "The river god wakes, and the priest grows weak." Before Jabari could speak, a rush of cold wind slammed into him, knocking him backward. He hit the ground, breath ripped from his chest. When he scrambled up, the figure was gone, swallowed by the river, as if it had never existed. But a mark remained on the riverbank, a symbol drawn in black mud, shaped like a wide-open mouth. And at its center, something glistened. Tooth. Human. Jabari stumbled back in horror. Behind him, a voice called from the darkness. "What are you doing by the river at this hour?" Jabari spun around, heart racing, only to see an elderly man stepping out of the shadows. His robe was dark green, embroidered with old tribal patterns, and around his neck hung a string of bones and polished river stones. It was Mshori, the village diviner. Jabari tried to speak, but words tangled in his throat. I saw something, someone in the river." Mshori raised a hand to silence him. "Do not describe what the river shows after midnight," he said quietly. "It listens." Jabari swallowed hard. Who was that priest it spoke of? Mshori's expression tightened ever so slightly. "You misheard." "No," Jabari insisted. "It said the priest grows weak." The old man's eyes drifted toward the dark water. "The river does not lie," he whispered. "But it does not always speak to the right people." Jabari stepped back. "What do you mean?" Mshori exhaled slowly, looking older than Jabari had ever seen him. "You should not have come here tonight." He turned away, cane tapping on the ground, but Jabari grabbed his arm. "Mshori, please. What is happening? Why is the river different?" The diviner looked at him, eyes heavy with burden. "Because," he said, voice barely above a breath, "the river god is starving. And the priest who once fed him has grown too old to satisfy his hunger." Jabari felt a cold pit open inside his chest. What does the river god eat? Mshori stared into the forest. Blood. Before Jabari could react, the wind shifted, carrying the faintest echo of chanting from deep within the trees. Low voices, humming a rhythm that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. Mshori stiffened. Go home, Jabari. Forget what you saw. Forget what you heard. I can't, Jabari said. You must, the diviner warned sharply. If the river chooses you, you will not escape it. But Jabari's fate had already twisted, because as he turned back toward the village, he saw something that made his blood run cold, something he knew he could never forget. Every hut's shadow had changed direction. Every single one pointed toward the river, as if watching, waiting, the first sign of awakening. And in the river behind him, just beneath the surface, two pale eyes opened, following him. His steps quickened. Inside his hut, he sat trembling, listening to the wind scrape against the walls like long nails. The river's hum followed him into the night, whispering in a language older than the village itself. He didn't sleep. And when dawn finally came, Jabari found muddy footprints outside his hut, but not human ones. They were long, webbed, and shaped like hands dragging across the earth. Everyone else in the village swore they heard nothing, saw nothing. But Jabari knew. The river god had chosen him. Far away, deeper in the forest, a hidden shrine lit its torches one by one. An ancient priest knelt before a stone altar, hands shaking. The river god's voice rumbled in his mind. Bring me what is mine, or I shall take the village myself. And as the priest rose, clutching his ritual blade, his cloudy eyes turned toward Nyandoro, and toward Jabari. The feeding must begin. The river god must be appeased. And Jabari would soon learn the cost of being chosen. Jabari barely closed his eyes that morning. The sunlight felt wrong, dimmer than usual, like it was filtered through river mist. He stepped outside and saw the villagers beginning their routines. Women pounding fufu, children chasing each other with palm leaves, elders sitting beneath the irako tree. Everything looked normal. But the air carried a weight, an invisible heaviness pressing down on the village. As he walked through the center, he noticed a group of elders whispering. Behind the granary hut, their faces were marked with unease. When Jabari approached, they fell silent. Old Mama Efuru, whose voice usually thundered through the market, looked at him with something close to fear. Jabari, she said, you should stay indoors after sunset tonight. Jabari frowned. Why? What is happening? But the elders avoided his gaze, dispersing like dry leaves blown by the wind. Only one lingered. A broad-shouldered man with a thick gray beard and eyes that had seen too much. It was Tambari, the village blacksmith. Boy, he said quietly, have you heard the river sing? Jabari's blood ran cold. He nodded. Tambari's jaw tightened. Then do not go near it tonight. Do not even look at it. Why not? Jabari asked. The blacksmith leaned closer. Because the river sings when it hungers, and those who hear it are marked. A chill crept up Jabari's spine. What does it mean to be marked? Tambari didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to Jabari's left arm. Lift your sleeve. Jabari hesitated, then slowly rolled up his shirt. A gasp escaped his own mouth. A faint symbol had appeared overnight. Dark, water-like ink spreading beneath his skin. The same symbol he had seen drawn in mud at the riverbank. The wide-open mouth. Tambari stepped back as if he were afraid to breathe the same air. You must seek Mshori again, he said hoarsely. Before the priest finds you. Jabari's heart kicked painfully in his chest. What priest? But the blacksmith was already walking away, shaking his head, refusing to explain further. Jabari turned to go find Mshori, but a sudden cold breeze brushed his neck, carrying a whisper only he could hear. You were chosen, do not run. He spun around. No one was there. Yet the whisper had brushed his ear like lips pulling at his spirit. He hurried through the village, pushing past the huts until he reached Mshori's small shrine. An old structure built from river stones and palm ropes. The door was slightly open, creaking softly, as if someone had entered in a hurry. Inside, incense still burned, filling the room with a smoky, bitter scent. Mshori, Jabari called. No answer. He stepped in carefully. Mats were scattered on the floor. Ritual gourds lay broken. A long trail of wet footprints led toward the back door of the shrine. Jabari followed them outside, and his stomach twisted. Mshori's cane was lying in the mud, snapped in half. Beside it, smear of fresh blood, and carved into the ground, as if by a long claw. Bring the marked one. Before fear crushed him entirely, a voice spoke from behind. You should not have come. Jabari jumped. An elderly woman stood at the forest edge, wearing a cloth dyed deep indigo. Her hair was braided with dried herbs, and around her feet were small clay charms. It was Nala, the herbalist, rarely seen, mostly silent but feared for her knowledge of forbidden things. What happened to Mshori? Jabari demanded. Nala's face was grim. He has been taken to the old shrine, the shrine of the river priest. Jabari's breath caught. Why? Because the priest felt the river stirring last night. He sensed someone new had been touched by its hunger. He felt the mark appear on you. Jabari swallowed the fear rising in his throat. Why me? The river god chooses those with strong spirits, he said. And you, Jabari, are too strong for the priest's liking. He stared at her. What do you mean? She stepped closer, her wrinkled hand lifting his arm gently to inspect the symbol. The priest's duty is to feed the river god. But he is old now. His strength is fading. He fears the river god will choose a new priest, and he wants to control who that new priest will be. Jabari shook his head. I don't want to be any priest. The river doesn't care what you want, Nala said quietly. When it chooses, resistance only feeds its anger. Jabari's pulse raced. What do I do? Nala closed her eyes for a moment. There is an ancient ritual, he said. A way to hide your spirit from the river's gaze for one night. Just one night. But it requires something dangerous. What? Nala looked into the forest. You must go to the Whispering Grove and pluck a leaf from the spirit's tongue plant. Jabari stiffened. Everyone knew the stories of the Whispering Grove. How every tree carried the voice of someone who had died there. How the shadows moved even without wind. Nala. Even hunters avoid that place. And tonight, she said, it is your only hope. He clenched his fists. What about Mshori? We cannot leave him. She touched his shoulder. The priest needs him alive for now. But you are in danger every breath you take. Jabari inhaled sharply. Then I will go to the grove. As he turned away, Nala called after him. Do not answer anything you hear in that forest. Not even if it calls your name. He nodded, heart pounding, and disappeared into the trees. The deeper he walked, the darker the forest became. The light dimmed as if swallowed by thick shadows. Vines dangled overhead like skeletal hands reaching for him. Then the whispers began. soft at first, then louder. Jabari, Jabari, come back. See you, Jabari. He clenched his jaw and kept walking, remembering Nala's warning. Do not answer. A cold breeze brushed past him, carrying a familiar voice. Jabari, please, help me. He froze. It was his mother's voice. But she had died 3 years ago. His chest tightened painfully. The voice came again, trembling, desperate. Zen. I am waiting. Tears stung his eyes. His body wanted to turn, to answer, to run toward the sound. But he forced himself forward, refusing to speak. The deeper he walked, the stronger the whispers grew. They twisted into cries, laughter, sobbing voices clawing at his mind. At last he reached the center of the grove, where a faint silver glow shone from the ground. A single plant stood there, its leaves shimmering like tongues made of moonlight. The spirit's tongue. Jabari bent to pluck one leaf. A hand grabbed his ankle. Cold. Wet. He gasped and looked down. A pale arm was crawling out of the soil, fingers gripping him tightly. Behind him, a voice exhaled. You cannot hide from me. Priest. Jabari yanked the leaf free and tore his leg away, sprinting through the forest as the whispers erupted into screams. As something large and heavy chased him through the darkness, breaking branches, snarling like a spirit starved for flesh. He didn't stop running until he burst out of the forest and collapsed near Nala's hut, gasping for breath, clutching the glowing leaf to his chest. Nala lifted him quickly. You got it, she said. Yes, he gasped. But the priest, he's in the grove, he's hunting. Her expression darkened. Then we have less time than I feared. She took the glowing leaf and placed it into a clay bowl, crushing it with a stone until it released a thick, shimmering liquid. Drink, she said. Jabari hesitated only a second before lifting the bowl to his lips. The liquid burned down his throat like fire. His vision blurred. His ears rang. Something cold wrapped around his chest like invisible vines. Then the world went black. When his eyes opened again, he was lying on the floor of Nala's hut. The herbalist sat beside him, breathing heavily. It is done, she whispered. The river cannot sense you tonight. Jabari exhaled in relief. But Nala wasn't finished. Tomorrow at dawn, she said, the river will search again. And it will be angrier. Jabari slowly sat up. What do we do tomorrow? Nala looked toward the river, her expression grim. Tomorrow, Jabari. We face the god itself. Outside, the wind shifted. The river began to hum again, louder this time, deeper, like a throat preparing to call someone home. And in the old shrine, far beyond the village, the priest's eyes snapped open. His lips curled into a smile. You cannot hide forever, boy. The river god's hunger was awakening. And the village of Nyandoro was running out of nights. The night felt heavier than the one before, as if the air itself feared what tomorrow would bring. Jabari sat inside Nala's hut, staring at the small clay lamp flickering beside him. Each time the flame swayed, it cast long shadows against the wall, shadows that looked too thin, too stretched, too alive. Nala prepared a mixture of herbs, grinding them with trembling hands. Jabari watched her. You're afraid, he said quietly. I have lived many years, she replied without looking at him. But never have I seen the river god stir like this. Its hunger has grown beyond ritual, beyond offering, beyond control. Jabari swallowed hard. Why now? Nala hesitated. Because the priest made a mistake, she whispered. And now the river god wants to correct it. Jabari leaned closer. What mistake? She finally looked him in the eyes. He fed it the wrong soul. Jabari felt his breath hitch. The river god demands one type of offering, Nala continued. Those chosen by the river itself. But last season, the priest grew impatient. Unsure if he could find the chosen. So he took someone else instead. Who? Jabari asked. Nala's face froze. A child. The words landed like a hammer. Jabari stared at her. A child who wasn't chosen. Nala nodded. When the river god tasted that soul, it screamed. The river churned with anger. It nearly swallowed the entire shore. The priest barely calmed it by promising he would find the rightful sacrifice. Jabari's stomach twisted. And now he wants to give it me instead. Yes, Nala whispered. Because you carry the mark. A true chosen. Jabari clenched his fists, fury rising in him. I will not let him take me. I will not let him feed me to something that feasts on blood. Nala touched his arm. Your spirit is strong. The river sensed that strength. That is why it marked you. But strength alone will not save you. You must understand the god's nature. What is it? He asked. She took a deep breath. The river god feeds not on bodies, but on fear. On spirits filled with terror. It drinks from the soul before it dies. A cold sweat formed on Jabari's back. So the priest, he must terrify the offering. Nala nodded. That is why he hunts during the night. Why he whispers through shadows. Why the god's chosen cannot sleep without seeing things in the dark. Jabari looked toward the river, barely visible through the trees. What happens if the river god doesn't get what it wants? Nala's voice dropped low. Then the river will come for the whole village. Jabari's heart thudded painfully. Then we must stop it, he said. Nala closed her eyes. There is only one way. A forbidden ritual. Jabari leaned forward. Tell me. She shook her head slowly. It has never succeeded. Not once. Not in all the generations of Nyandoro. I don't care, Jabari said. Tell me. She hesitated, then finally spoke. To end the river god's hunger. Its priest must be sacrificed. Jabari blinked. The priest. The one who serves him. Yes, Nala said. Because the priest is the god's link to our world. Without him, the river god cannot demand offerings. His voice becomes faint. Its reach fades. Jabari frowned. Then why hasn't anyone done it before? Nala's expression was bitter. Because the priest cannot be killed by ordinary means. He carries the god's blessing. A blessing that twists into a curse. Jabari's heartbeat quickened. What must be done? To kill him, Nala said. You must cut the bond between him and the river. How? The priest must be dragged onto dry land, and kept away from all water, even the moisture in the air. Only then can he be stabbed with the bone of silence. Jabari frowned. What bone? She pointed toward her hut's corner. There, wrapped in cloth, was a long, pale object. Jabari picked it up slowly. It was a ritual blade made entirely from carved bone. Smooth white, but freezing cold like stone pulled from a grave. This belonged to the first priest, Nala said. Before the river god turned into what it is now. He used this blade to bind the river spirit. Now it must be used to free us. Jabari tightened his grip on the bone blade. Then I will do it. Before Nala could speak, a thunderous crack echoed across the village. Jabari and Nala froze. Another crack. Then another. The sound of wood splitting, clay shattering, and screams. Jabari sprang to his feet and rushed outside. His eyes widened in horror. The shadows of the huts were moving. Not flickering. Moving. Crawling across the ground like black water spilling in every direction. Villagers ran through the night, shouting, falling, scrambling for safety as their own shadows chased them across the earth. The river god had awakened. A cold voice rolled over the village like wind. You hid the chosen from me. The shadows stretched taller, rising like long figures with hollow faces. Now all of Nyandoro shall be punished. Nala ran out behind Jabari, clutching a bundle of charms. We must reach the central fire, she yelled. Shadows cannot cross pure flame. Jabari grabbed her hand and ran. The ground beneath them writhed with ink-like tendrils, reaching, clawing. Villagers screamed as shadows latched onto their ankles, pulling them down, dragging them toward the direction of the river. Jabari saw a young girl fall, shadows wrapping around her like ropes. Help me, she cried. Without thinking, he sprinted toward her, slashing the bone blade across the shadow's form. It hissed, actually hissed like a wounded creature recoiling. Jabari lifted the girl to her feet. Run. Go. He fled. Jabari turned and froze. At the edge of the village, stepping out of the darkness like a spirit birthed from night, the priest appeared. His tall frame was painted in river clay. His eyes glowed pale blue, and from his mouth dripped water, thick, dark, rippling with unnatural life. You cannot run from destiny, he said, voice echoing unnaturally. The river god has waited long enough. Jabari gripped the bone blade. The priest smiled slowly. So, you prepare to fight me. Nala stepped beside Jabari. He is not alone. The priest tilted his head, amused. No, but you are both too late. He lifted his hand. Behind him the river rose. Not water. Shadows. Liquid darkness swelling upward like a giant wave. Tonight, the priest whispered, the god feasts. The wave crashed toward the village. Jabari grabbed Nala and dove aside as the darkness slammed across the earth, swallowing huts, crushing fences, dragging livestock screaming into its depths. When he got up, coughing, he saw something that churned his stomach. The wave was not just darkness. It was made of faces. Hundreds. Mouths open, wailing, hands clawing outward like the dead begging to rise. Jabari's heart hammered. Nala clutched his arm. We must lure him away from the river. The villagers looked at one another, eyes full of exhaustion and an old aching desire to be free. On the river's opposite bank, the water churned, and in its depths something massive stirred, a shadow the size of an island rolling like a belly. From the tide priest, the river's voice came, thin now, a thread of longing. Feed me, it wailed. Choose, choose, the bone alone is cold. Jabari felt bile rise in his throat. He staggered forward, bone in hand. What choice? He asked. Nala's eyes glowed with a wild kind of resolve. We must give the river a name that binds it to mercy. We must remind it of how it once was. Water that gave without taking. We will sing to it. Old songs, true songs, until the god remembers being river and not maw. Can singing change the god? Someone scoffed. It can, Nala said. If enough of us sing with truth on our tongues, the god must listen. Spirits are fed by belief as well as blood. If we give it memory of giving, perhaps it will unlearn hunger. The villagers hesitated. Then slowly, with ragged voices, they began to sing. At first small, then swelling like a tide. The poems their grandmothers had once taught them rose like steam, the names of rain, of fish, of harmless water. They called the river by the names of their ancestors, the names that had once coaxed salmon and brought health. They sang for the river's belly to soften, for the old hunger to remember the coolness of open water, not the metallic taste of blood. The song reached the far bank, and the river shuddered. Faces that had been eager with hunger twisted, and some covered their mouths as if in sudden shame. The great shadow paused, and for a moment the village could hear only the wind and the faint wet whimper of the priest. Then the water heaved, and a single shape rose, impossibly enormous, its skin like wet stone, eyes the color of deep pools. It lifted from the river as if it were a creature uncoiling and looked upon the villagers. Did not roar. It listened. Jabari's throat tightened. The thing's voice in his head was old and patient, an echo like a current through caves. Why did you feed me with wrong blood? Why did you teach me hunger? Nala stepped forward, fear and courage in equal measure. Because a man was weak and afraid, she said, voice steady. Because we thought we could bargain our way out of what we owed. We will not do that again. The river god's eyes narrowed. Change. Prove it. How? Someone whispered. Let the priest be waterless, Nala said. Let him live among us bound to remember his crime. We will teach our children the true names of the river. We will stop offering the scared and the innocent. Her face hardened. We will offer choice. Those who give to the river give out of knowledge and reverence. The gods' thought moved like a slow tide. It tested them with images. Feasts of screaming mouths, children lured into currents, a village swallowed whole. The people held fast, their songs unwavering. At last, the great shape sank back into the river, but it did not vanish. It rested like a dark island beneath the water, listening. Its last thought to them was not a bite but a promise. I will wait. If you forget, I will remember for you. If you break the pact, I will return. I hunger when you lie. The priest hung from the irako, alive and mute, eyes hollow, remembering both his old power and his new helplessness. He would live now as a warning. He would taste thirst and the weight of every choice. The village did not celebrate. They tended wounds and burned the worst of the shadows into ash. They sang for hours until their voices cracked, and then again the next day, and the next. The river slowed, but it did not become gentle. It had learned something from that night. Memory is an education as well as a wound. Jabari walked to the riverbank where the water licked at his toes, cold and clean. He watched the surface shiver, fish breaking the tension, and felt a small thing like hope or perhaps wary truce. He traced the mark on his arm, now dull and faded. The bone of silence lay beside him, the work of it done. Nala approached, her silhouette a soft shadow among reeds. You did not become a feast, she said softly. No, he answered. But I nearly did. Nala sat beside him. You are marked still, she said. Some memories do not wash away. But you made a choice. They watched the river together in companionable silence. Children laughed in the distance, splashing at the shallows, cautious now but alive. The priest's voice echoed faintly from the irako tree, and villagers would bring food to him, not as sacrifice but as binding, humble reminders he had authority no more. Days passed into weeks. The mark on Jabari's arm faded further, but sometimes at night when the wind came off the water, he would hear the faintest humming, the memory of hunger. He would wake with the taste of iron on his tongue and hold his breath until morning. Sometimes Nala would take him to the Whispering Grove. They tended the spirit's tongue plant and fed it with songs. They taught the children the true names, and the children learned to call the river friend, not monster. But the river was patient. It had been fed for generations on fear, and habit does not die easily. On moonless nights Jabari would sometimes feel a tug in his bones, a reminder that the river watched. He would glance at the iroko tree where the priest hung, alive, aware, and unbroken by death, and remember the bone's weight. Months later, while repairing a broken canoe, Jabari saw a small ripple on the water that moved against the current. On its surface floated something that made his skin crawl, a small tooth white as bone, the same kind he had first found in the mud the night the mark chose him. He picked it up with shaking fingers and held it between thumb and forefinger. It was not new. It had been polished by water and time. The silence around him seemed suddenly heavy. Nala walked up behind him, her eyes reading his face. "You found a memory," she said. He did not answer. She sighed. "The river still remembers. Keeps bones the way humans keep promises. We made a truce, but bones do not forget." Jabari pressed the tooth into his palm and felt the weight of that night, and the weight of what they had done. He swallowed. The river had been fed wrong, the priest had been bound, the village had sung itself into a fragile peace. But some things in the world do not conclude in one night. The water had learned a new taste. The people had learned to be wary. A pact had been written in song and rope and blood, but it would be tested. The priest, Jabari rasped. "Yes, drag him onto dry land, far from the banks." Jabari looked at the priest and felt a surge of fierce determination. "Then we end this tonight." He rushed forward, the bone blade glowing faintly in his grip. The priest laughed. "Come, chosen one." He stepped down from the riverbank toward Jabari. His stride slow, confident, terrible. The final confrontation had begun. And somewhere deep beneath the churning darkness, the river god opened its monstrous jaws, waiting to feed. The priest stepped forward, his feet leaving wet prints on the dry soil though the air around him was bone-dry. He smiled with a mouth that tasted of river silt and old promises. Behind him, the darkness he commanded roiled like a living ocean, faces pressed against its skin, mouths opening and closing in hunger. Jabari tightened his grip on the bone of silence. The bone hummed faintly, as if aware of what must be done. He had not been chosen to die without a fight. If he had to become a weapon, he would. If he had to end a priest to end a god, then he would bear that weight. Nala stood at his side, charms clutched in both hands. Smoke from her bundle rose, braided with sparks that refused to die. Around them, the village burned. Huts alight, villagers fleeing or trapped by their own shadows, the central fire a lone island of defiant light in an expanding sea of dark. The priest laughed softly. "You would see me fall," he said. "You would cut the link and be free of the river's teeth." "You tied us to your hunger," Jabari said, voice steady though his hands shook. "You turned our river into a mouth." He moved forward one step. The shadows recoiled as if stung. The priest's eyes narrowed. He raised one hand, and the faces in the darkness leaned toward Jabari like a tide. They reached. The air tasted of iron. "Then come, chosen one," the priest murmured. "Bind me to the land. See if your bone of silence is real." Jabari lunged. For a breath, the world narrowed into the arc of the blade and the priest's painted face. The priest slipped aside with unnatural grace, water beads falling from his skin though there was no river underfoot. He struck not with blade but with cold laughter, and the shadows wrapped around Jabari, squeezing, pulling, trying to drown the breath from his chest. Nala chanted, words like stones thrown into a still pool. Her voice carved a thin line through the wail of the river's hunger. Charms sparked and glowed, and where their light touched, shadows shrank and hissed. Jabari felt his strength drain like water from a pierced gourd. The mark on his arm burned. The bone of silence grew heavier, as if the decision it demanded had weight that belonged to the whole village. He forced his feet to move, to step onto the path that led away from the riverbank, to where dry earth would break the priest's tether. The priest's hand closed around a shadow figure, a shape that had once been the blacksmith's son, and squeezed until the boy's face was a smear of wet fear. "You will not take me lightly," the priest intoned. "You cannot kill what serves the god." Jabari felt a rage unlike any he had known. He rose and screamed, not for mercy but for the name of everyone who had slept with the river's noise in their bones. He drove the bone forward as if he could pierce every dark mouth at once. The blade struck the priest's side. There was a sound like hollow wood cracking, and the water-scented laughter slowed. For a moment, the priest's face was simply human, an old man's face, wearing the tired arrogance of a man who thought himself indispensable. His hand slipped from the shadow boy. The boy collapsed, coughing, shaking, alive. The bone of silence sank deeper. The priest's breath hitched, and for a shard of time the river's roar became a soft, strangled sob. Faces in the darkness contorted, some in rage, some in terror. The priest's painted skin cracked like dried mud, revealing not the pale blue glow but raw, exposed vein and pulp beneath. He fell forward, and for the first time since anyone could remember, the priest's voice was not a bridge to the river but a small human sound. "Cut him free!" Nala cried, and the villagers who had not yet been swallowed rallied. Some with hoes, some with knives, some with the fierce courage that spills out when one must protect home. They surged, pulling at ropes and at the priest's garments, hauling him further from the river center. The bone of silence pulsed. Jabari wrenched it up, feeling the lock between priest and water resisting, straining. The priest's eyes, once purely blue like river light, flashed with memory. The first offerings, the first songs, the warmth of a god that had been companion and terror. Then the eyes cooled. The priest gave a great, ragged sound like a river losing its course. He reached toward Jabari with empty hands, and then he laughed, the kind of laugh that has been heard by many but understood by none, and spat a mouthful of black water that hissed as it hit dry soil. Nala's charms burned bright. The shadows nearest the fire recoiled, smoke rolling off them like oil from hot water. A hush fell, a fragile thing. But the river god did not end. Killing the priest did not sever the god's memory, its hunger. The surface of the earth shivered, and the faces in the darkness pressed harder, now furious and confused. The priest's body twitched, convulsed, and then slumped, alive but broken, under the hands of the villagers. They dragged him farther inland, tying him to the old Iroko tree where sacrificial criminals had been bound long ago. They bound him with ropes blessed by Nala's chants, soaked in crushed spirit's tongue, and they drove stakes around him to create a ring of dry, holy earth. For a moment the bond held. The river's howl receded like a tide at the command of a moon. Shadows uncoiled, loosening their hold on the villagers. People who had been pulled to their knees rose and coughed. The young blacksmith staggered, rubbing at his eyes. Jabari sank to the ground, trembling. The mark on his arm had cooled. He had not become the sacrifice tonight. Yet between his ribs something heavy had lodged, an awareness that the river's hunger had not been slain, only angered. Nala climbed onto a fallen log and addressed the gathered people. Her voice was worn but firm. "We cut the priest's tether," she said. "But cut alone is not enough. The river remembers what we ate from it. We must undo the debts to the water." "How?" called Tombari, voice hoarse. "Offerings will not do," Nala said. "It wants what it wants, an end to being fed by deceit. We must make a new pact, one born from choice, not from fear." As the sun slid down and the river reflected the falling light like a blade, Jabari walked home, the tooth clinking against his other bones, a small, stubborn reminder that the river ate memory and the world kept score. And somewhere, deep beneath the river's surface, the gods settled like an old thing waiting. It tasted not only the village's offerings but also its promises. The night would come again when mouths opened and choices were tested. The village lit its fires each dusk a little sooner now. They taught their children to sing properly. They watched their dead with more careful eyes. They did not forget the priest's weakness, or the bone that had ended it, or the way faces had pressed against the dark the night the river rose. On a night months later, when the moon was a thin scar, a stranger arrived at Nyandoro's edge. He was wet to the knees, breath steaming in the cool air, and the way he looked at the river told Jabari immediately that he had come with a story. The stranger approached the central fire. He bowed his head and said, "There is a priest in a marsh far downstream. He plucks children from their beds and carries them into the reeds. We tried to stop him, but he is strong. He calls himself servant of the river. We feared to act." Jabari felt the old hunger rise in his gut, not for food but for duty. He touched the bone at his belt. Nala looked at him, her face unreadable under torchlight. "Then it seems our pact will be tested," she said. Jabari did not answer. He stared into the fire as if it might show him the right path. The river's hum rose, a low vibration through the ground, neither threat nor ally but a constant presence. He thought of the tooth he had tucked into a pouch that morning, and of the black mud mark that had once spread under his skin. The memory of the priest's pale, painted face flashed in his mind. He understood in a small, cold way that peace between villages and gods is never a single act. It is a long deal written across seasons and hearts. That night, as the fires died and the villagers fell into careful sleep, Jabari climbed a small hill outside the village and looked toward the river's mouth. The water winked under the moon, indifferent and patient. He felt its gaze on him like salt on skin. The bone of silence, warm against his palm, was a reminder. The river had been fed, the priest had been bound, but memory and hunger lingered. The god would call again. Some nights the call would be weak and ignorable. Some nights it would roar. The villagers had done something brave and dangerous. They had chosen to bargain with a creature that remembers. Jabari breathed in the river air and accepted the fact that his life, like the village's, was now a stitch in an older tapestry. He would watch, he would teach, he would stand when needed. He had not been sacrificed. He had been marked, and with that mark came responsibility. The river hummed beneath the stars, the sound of a throat that had been used, and perhaps taught to sing again. The end of one hunger had not ended all hunger. Subscribe if you dare. Follow the river's song, learn the names, and never feed a god from fear. Like, comment, and join our fire.